Okay, so we're going to move on to the next phylum. Again, we're kind of going in order, starting way back in time that these different phyla diverged, branched off. So the next major one we're going to look at is Phylum Nematoda. And these are the nematodes. Now they're commonly called nematodes or roundworms. Right? These are the roundworms, the nematodes. And they are found, let me tell you, almost everywhere. All aquatic habitats are going to have them. They're present in virtually all soils and in the moist tissues of plants and the moist tissues of animals, growing inside mushrooms. They're found almost everywhere. Some are free living, some are parasitic. Now they do have an alimentary canal. That means they've got a gut that has a mouth and an anus, and food moves through it generally in one direction. That's a big leap, isn't it, up from the platyhelminthes? That's quite a big sort of jump in complexity. The platyhelminths, remember, one opening, which served as a mouth and anus, or they didn't have a gut at all. Roundworms do have a complete, proper alimentary canal with a mouth and a gut and generally one-way movement of food through it. But they don't have a circulatory system. Did the platyhelminths have a circulatory system? No. They absorbed everything they needed. They exchanged everything they needed over their surface area. Okay, so no circulatory system. What does that tell you about the animal? What can you deduce from that, maybe? What does a circulatory system do at a very fundamental level? It might have a role in regulating temperature, but what's the most fundamental role of a circulatory system? Transport. Transport things around. Why do you need to transport things around? Have you ever waited at a bus stop and the bus never come? You couldn't get from A to B, could you? Right? So, circulatory system transports things generally quickly. No circulatory system, you don't get rapid transport of substances like gases or nutrients. So if you don't have a circulatory system and you're not rapidly moving gases and nutrients, what does that tell you maybe about your lifestyle or your body? Maybe you're not super active, right? Because maybe you're not using lots of oxygen or burning lots of calories. Or if you're active, you've got to be what? Small. You've got to be small, right? That way, you've got a large surface area to volume ratio, and you can exchange things over your surface area, and they don't need to be transported around internally. Okay? Bless you. So, reproduction in nematodes, then, is usually sexual. There's a male and there's a female, separate sexes. Now, we haven't seen that very much in the platyhelminths. There was the bilharzia fluke, which does have separate sexes, a little bit of the exception. Generally, they were hermaphroditic. Nematodes tend not to be. They tend to have separate sexes, males and females. And reproduction is by internal fertilization. A male will internally fertilize a female. So the body plan then, all right? The body plan of a nematode, they are triploblastic, 3 embryonic germ layers. They do have a body cavity, but it's a pseudocoelom. The pseudocoelom is a jump up from the platyhelminthes, a jump in complexity from no coelom in the platyhelminths. The nematodes have got a pseudocoelom. So they're triploblastic, pseudocoelomates, and what's their symmetry? They're a worm. Bilateral symmetry. So they are your three parts of the body plan which are pretty much diagnostic of the phylum Nematoda. So if I'm ever asking you for the definition or the diagnostic characteristics of nematodes, you're going to say they are triploblastic pseudocoelomates with bilateral symmetry, and they are unsegmented roundworms. The flatworms are unsegmented flatworms. Nematodes are unsegmented roundworms. Okay. Good? So they do have a rudimentary nervous system and musculature. Now, we're going to look at them in lab, and you're going to see them move. They kind of move with sort of a thrashing-like motion, or just a very basic sort of S-shape, curving sort of wriggle motion. That's all they're really capable of, is this. Okay? They don't seem to get sort of long and short and fat. They mostly do this. So what kind of muscles would you expect to be very well developed? They're not doing too much of this, but they're doing an awful lot of this. What's going to allow them to do this motion? Which kind of muscles? Think about the kind of muscles you can have. Here's a worm. There's a cross-section. What muscles are going to enable you to bend that way? Contraction where? So dorsal ventral muscles are going to cause you to move in this way, aren't they? So what could cause you to move in that direction?
Adductors and abductors.
What about muscles that run the whole length? Longitudinal muscles that run the whole length of the animal. Yep. Muscles on this side, if they contract, are going to get shorter, and it's going to cause it to do that. Once the ones on this side relax and the ones up there contract, it's going to do that. Is everyone okay with that? Contraction of circular muscles is going to do a couple of things, but what's it going to do? Sorry? Right, it's going to make it get narrower in diameter, narrower in cross-section, and probably elongate. And then when they relax, it's going to shorten. For these longitudinal muscles contract, it will also get short. I do want you to be able to relate the type of movement with the type of muscles. I want you to get an idea. I want you to be able to predict what kind of muscles the animal has from the way it moves, from the movement that it's capable of. Is everyone okay with that? Okay. Do you feel comfortable then, this thrashing motion being contraction of longitudinal muscles? Yep. Okay. Okay, so they move just kind of thrashing around sort of movement. Now you're going to contrast that to an earthworm, which moves in quite a different way. Yep. All right. So size-wise, nematodes span an enormous range, from 300 microns, and that's about 1/3 of a millimeter, to over 8 meters. Can you even picture how big 8 meters is? It's about the distance from the wall to me. That's 8 meters. To 1/3 of a millimeter, 300 microns. Yeah.
Where would ones that big be found?
So I don't know much about them. I really don't. I know a little bit. I know some about the little tiny ones that are internal parasites, the ones that live in the soil. If you're 8 meters long, you've got to live in the soil or the ocean, or some aquatic habitat. Actually, maybe not the ocean, but some sort of freshwater aquatic habitat. That's where I would guess, or the soil.
You say that, but the longest human tapeworm recorded was 25 meters.
Was it? All right. Okay. Could be an internal parasite. Most of them, though, are between about 400 microns and 5 millimeters. So roughly 0.5 millimeter to 5 millimeters in length. Tiny, that's what most of them are, about that big. Okay? All right. So some of them are free living. They live out there. They're not parasitic. They might live in the soil. But they're not parasitic on a host. They don't rely on a host. But many of them are parasitic. So the free-living ones are free-living in a huge variety of habitats, and the parasitic ones are pretty much parasitic on everything. So I can't remember who quoted this, but they said that if you were to take any living organism, lay it on a bench, remove all the tissues of that organism, what would be left would be a ghostly image of the nematodes that infect it as parasites. Okay? It's comforting, isn't it? So, here's a scanning electron micrograph of a nematode. You can very clearly see it's got a mouth and a mouth end, and the anus would be somewhere over there. It's not segmented, although you can see these striations on its cuticle. This is a light micrograph of a nematode. All right? And you can see again a mouth and a mouth end. Its gut goes all the way through, and it opens up at the end. Now the light micrograph on this image, I want you to pay close attention to this. It's a needle-like structure called a stylet. It's attached to muscles, and the nematode can poke it in and out like this. And it's one way that some of them feed. So they poke it out, disrupt tissues, and then kind of suck that disrupted tissue back in to its mouth.
What was that called?
Stylet. I'll show you. It's on a labeled diagram in just a sec. There you go, right there. Now, nematodes are also capable of making enormous numbers of eggs. So a very large part of their body mass is devoted to egg production. Now again, separate sexes, you're either a female with ovaries, a uterus and ovaries and a vagina, and you make loads of eggs, or you're a male with very big testes and you make loads of sperm. Fertilization's internal. Male would insert a copulatory organ into there, the vagina, release sperm, and that would fertilize the eggs. So here's an example of a male compared to a female. What would be a really easy way to tell a male from a female? Size is often a clue, yes. But let's just say you've only got one or the other, not both, to compare. What would be the best way to differentiate a male from a female? The copulatory spicule you can see under the dissecting microscope. Yep. It's even easier than that. What do females produce that males don't? Eggs. Eggs are pretty big and they're pretty conspicuous. You can see eggs in the female, you can't see eggs in the male. It's hard to see sperm. All right? We're going to do a dissection of an earthworm, and if you want, you can take out the seminal vesicles that contain worm sperm. You can see them. They swim around. All right? Okay. If we were to dissect one of these large nematodes, you would see a vagina and you would see a bifurcated uterus, and it's quite long. It goes up into the ovaries and so on. You can see a very well-developed intestinal tract that runs the length. So here's a cross-section of a nematode. And there's the cross-section of another nematode. One's a male, one's a female. Now, it's not as obvious in this cross-section because it's a picture as the ones that you're going to see through the microscope when you look at them in lab. So, look at this. The cross-sections I'm showing you are through this rough region here. At least one of the cross-sections is through this region. So what would you say, male or female? Why female? Yeah. You can see this is a cross-section through one of those branches of the uterus and another one. What do you think these are? in here. Eggs. You can clearly see them on the cross-section of the microscope slide. So this is actually the lumen of the gut in there. Why would you say this is a good candidate for the gut? This is the clue just here. Good. Muscle tissue. All right? Again, it's clear under the microscope. It's densely stained, and you can see it's quite sort of banded. These are actually the uterus bifurcates many times, and it sort of gets folded backwards and forwards. It further sort of fragments, and it almost looks like almost looks frilly. They get so thin, and they go backwards and forwards in the animal. So these are parts of the ovary where we've cut through it, tubes that just run backwards and forwards in the animal. Okay, it's so that you can pack a long length in a small animal. Just fold it backwards and forwards. So here we've got packing tissue and muscle layers, and quite a thick cuticle. All right, and there's the male. So what do you think these are? What are the gonads in a male? Testes, exactly what they are. Good, and then you've got the gut in the middle. There's the lumen of the gut, and there's the muscles. Okay, good. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of nematodes. In fact, the nematode parasites are fascinating. All right, they really are. This one is not a parasite, but I want you to be familiar with it. Now, this is a bit of a mouthful. Once you've said it a couple of times, it comes out quite easy. How would you say that word? Cenorhabditis. Cenorhabditis elegans. Because Cenorhabditis is a bit of a mouthful, it's usually abbreviated to C. elegans. So C. elegans is a model organism used in an awful lot of research, a lot of genetics. We've sequenced its entire genome. So this is what makes Cenorhabditis elegans, C. elegans, an awesome organism to do research on. Firstly, they're very small, which means in a single petri dish you can maybe have hundreds of them. Imagine trying to work on tigers and having 100 tigers. You need an awful lot of money and an awful lot of space. These, they're cheap to keep, and you can house many of them in a small space. Different sexes. So you can cross a male with a female and not worry about self-crossing, self-fertilization. All right? So they go through their life cycle very quickly. All right. So there a lot of genetics and medical research is done on this organism. We'll look at some in lab. They're very small, okay, but you can see them wriggling on the surface of the agar in a petri dish. All right. So now let's have a look at some of these parasitic nematodes. So I won't finish this, but I can give you a little teaser for next time. So here's a parasitic nematode. All right. We're going to look at this particular species in lab. How long do you think this guy is? What? A what?
20 centimeters.
Ooh, now you're talking. Centimeters, not feet and inches. All right. So maybe it's about 15, maybe it's about 20 centimeters long if it was unraveled. All right. So this is a parasite. It's called Ascaris lumbricoides, and it's the giant roundworm. Ascaris lumbricoides. Giant roundworm. Oh, what unfortunate beast does this parasitize? You. Us. Yes. It's a gut parasite of humans. Okay. Females can get quite big, 20 to 35 centimeters. About that big. Males, a little bit smaller, 15 to 30. Okay. Why are the females bigger? Eggs are bigger. Yep. So to get this parasite, you've got to ingest embryonated eggs. You've got to consume them somehow. It does not have an alternate or intermediate host. Its normal life cycle is human to human. Okay? Nematode eggs are very, very, very tiny. It could totally be on the food you're eating and you would never know it. You would never even really see it. Now, once you ingest those eggs, they hatch in your gut and then they enter your blood system. Is that kind of weird? Because they're gut parasites. Why don't they just hatch in your gut and develop into big worms and stay in your gut? So I don't know the reason why. I really don't. There must be a reason. But what that reason is, I don't know. So, but they burrow through your gut wall, enter the blood system, move around your blood system, and they ultimately break into the alveoli in your lungs. So then they're in an airspace. They swim up to the back of your throat, where you swallow them back down into your gut, and that's where they grow into nice big roundworms and mature in your gut. All right, I think we'll wrap this part up there. Good?